The morning sun rose gently over Wisteria Lane, casting gold across the dew-soaked lawns of a neighborhood that had never known true tragedy. Inside the Rowe residence, silence held its breath. The ticking of a wall clock was the only sound, steady, indifferent. On the kitchen floor lay Daniel Rowe, his body twisted, the pistol still warm on the tiles. Across from him, Emily sat on the edge of a chair, her nightgown speckled with blood, her face calm, almost serene. When the police arrived, she did not flinch. She looked up at them, eyes soft and unblinking, and whispered. He finally stopped yelling. It was the kind of mourning that seemed to stretch forever, suspended between shock and acceptance, the air thick with the unspoken truth that something inside this house had been dying long before Daniel ever did. Detective Luis Moreno stepped from his unmarked car into the golden quiet of the neighborhood. The call had sounded routine. Domestic disturbance, possible shooting. But as he crossed the threshold of the Rowe home, the air itself changed. It was heavy, scented with copper and fear. Emily sat where the first responders had left her, wrists resting on her knees, eyes vacant but oddly composed. Moreno studied her carefully. Years of homicide work had taught him to recognize shock, guilt, and madness. What he saw now was none of those. Only peace. When he asked what happened, she answered softly, "He came home angry. He always came home angry." The detective felt the weight of that sentence more than any confession he'd ever heard. 3 months earlier, Emily's laughter filled the same kitchen. Daniel leaned against the counter, smiling. The kind of smile that hid sharp edges. The neighbors would have called them perfect. The cop and his teacher wife, always holding hands at Sunday service. But behind closed doors, Daniel's voice changed. It cut through the house, controlling every sound, every breath. The neighbors never saw the bruises on Emily's arms or the quiet tears in the shower. She had learned to hide pain with routine, to cook dinner through the echo of slammed doors. What no one knew then was that every time she set the table, she counted 3 plates, 2 plates, then 1. At precisely 11:47 p.m., a single gunshot echoed through the stillness of Wisteria Lane. Across the street, Helen McCarthy jolted awake, her heart racing. She had heard their arguments before, muffled through summer nights, but never like this. Through her blinds, she saw the row house bathed in soft lamplight. No movement, no shouting, just silence. She hesitated before dialing 911, her trembling voice barely coherent. "It's the Rose," she whispered. Something's wrong. She didn't know that by the time the dispatcher answered, Daniel was already gone. As officers led her outside, Emily lifted her chin slightly toward the morning sun. Cameras flashed. Neighbors gathered. The world expected tears. But instead, she smiled. Not the smile of pride, nor madness, but of release. Years of fear, of walking on eggshells and pretending everything was fine, dissolved in that one quiet curve of her lips. Detective Moreno watched her closely, sensing that this case would not be about what happened that night, but what had been happening for years. The shutters clicked like gunfire as Emily's smile became tomorrow's headline. The wife who didn't cry. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the small interview room. Emily Rowe sat across from Detective Moreno, her wrists now free of cuffs, but her composure tighter than ever. She was 34, though the sleepless night carved deeper lines across her pale face. Her voice, when it came, was measured, like someone reciting facts she had memorized long ago. "He said he'd kill me this time," she whispered. "So I stopped waiting." Moreno didn't interrupt. He just watched her, reading the fragments between her words. On the table sat her wedding ring. Gold. Clean, untouched by blood. In that sterile space, her confession didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like freedom, carefully disguised as regret. 2 days later, the local news ran Daniel Rowe's photograph across every channel. Beloved officer slain by wife, His colleagues lined up outside the precinct, their grief mingled with disbelief. They remembered him as the charming patrolman who volunteered for school visits and community fairs. But to Emily, he had been something else entirely. Publicly adored, privately feared, a man who mastered the art of dual lives. The same smile that once comforted neighbors had made Emily's stomach tighten with dread. As the world mourned a hero, she sat in a holding cell, watching the coverage in silence, her reflection flickering in the small metal screen. Before the shooting, there were dinners, carefully arranged meals where silence did the talking. Emily remembered one in particular. Roast chicken, white wine, a single candle flickering between them. Daniel sat across the table, scrolling his phone, commenting on her cooking like a critic rather than a husband. When she laughed at something on TV, he told her to stop, that her laugh was too loud. She did. That night, she stared at her reflection in the wine glass, realizing she'd forgotten what her real laugh even sounded like. The control had become invisible, woven into every gesture, every word unsaid. Not everyone was blind. Emily's friend, Lena Carter, had seen the bruises once, faint marks on Emily's wrist, as she poured coffee after church. "You need to leave him," Lena had whispered, but Emily only smiled and said, "It's fine." The next week, she stopped answering calls. For months, Lena wondered if she'd done enough. Now, watching the news of the murder, she sat frozen, realizing that the smile Emily gave her that morning had been a goodbye. Detective Moreno returned to the row house days later, searching for something the evidence team had missed. In the basement, dust coated everything. Boxes, tools, a treadmill Daniel never used. Behind an old wardrobe, he found a wooden box filled with memory cards. Inside the footage, a different Daniel appeared, shouting, slamming doors, smashing plates, while Emily stood still, trembling, silent. It wasn't rage he saw in her eyes. It was resignation. The detective watched in silence, feeling his own reflection flicker in the cold light of truth. Whatever Emily had done that night, it no longer seemed like murder. It felt like survival. The evidence room was colder than usual, the hum of old fluorescent lights echoing over metal shelves and plastic containers labeled Row. Case hash 24. 1 and 76. Detective Moreno stood at the desk, reviewing the recovered footage from the basement. Each clip peeled back another layer of pretense. Shaky handheld recordings captured Daniel's voice rising. The thud of footsteps, the trembling apologies of a woman who had long since stopped believing they mattered. The timeline was damning, but not in the way the prosecutors imagined. Each timestamp told the story of erosion, not just of love, but of identity. As Moreno pressed play one last time, Emily's voice filled the room, soft and pleading. "Please, just stop recording." For the first time, the detective realized he wasn't investigating a murder. He was documenting a slow death that had begun years before the trigger was ever pulled. The autopsy report arrived the next morning. Sterile words dissecting a life once full of motion. Cause of death: single gunshot wound to the chest. No defensive wounds. No struggle. Toxicology clear. Yet something in the coroner's notes caught Moreno's attention. Minor bruising around Daniel's wrists, consistent with restraint and faint traces of alcohol, despite the clean report. The puzzle grew strange. Had Emily tied him down, or had he been trying to restrain her? The detective leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere between the lines of this report lay the truth, one that neither side wanted to read aloud. Prosecutor Anna Wallace had built her career on clarity, evidence, motive, confession, conviction. But this case refused to play by the rules. Every new detail seemed to blur the lines between victim and perpetrator. Watching Emily in the interrogation footage, Anna couldn't decide what disturbed her more, the calmness or the quiet logic behind her words. "He said he'd kill me," Emily had whispered. "He just never said when." Anna replayed that line over and over, her reflection hardening in the monitor's glow. In her mind, the trial was already forming, a stage where truth would become performance, and performance might become survival. Late that night, Moreno revisited the crime scene alone. The house on Wisteria Lane was sealed off, its silence unbroken since that morning. As he moved through the dark hallway, his flashlight beam caught a faint glint beneath the couch. He knelt, reaching under. A cell phone, cracked, half buried in dust. When powered on, it showed Daniel's last video recording. A grainy clip of him pacing, voice slurred, shouting accusations at an unseen Emily. The video cut off mid-sentence, the sound of the gunshot overlapping his final word. Moreno froze. The timestamp matched the time of death exactly. There were no words afterward, just static. By the week's end, the story had erupted. Reporters flooded the courthouse steps, their microphones angled toward flashing cameras. Emily Rowe, the smiling widow, had become a national obsession. Half of America saw a cold-blooded killer, the other half a symbol of silent endurance. Detective Moreno stood off to the side as Prosecutor Wallace delivered her statement to the press. Her tone was confident, rehearsed. But Moreno noticed her hesitation between sentences, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The crowd's questions grew louder, more frantic. Inside the courthouse, behind soundproof glass, Emily sat with her lawyer, watching the spectacle unfold. Her face remained unreadable. She knew this was only the beginning. The investigation had found the truth, but the trial would decide whose version of it survived. The courthouse buzzed with murmurs as the Rowe trial began. Camera crews lined the marble steps, broadcasting every moment like a national event. Inside, the air was colder, cleaner. The smell of paper and polish replacing the scent of blood and fear. Emily Rowe sat at the defense table in a simple navy dress, her auburn hair neatly tied back. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Anna Wallace adjusted her notes, her eyes sharp, voice steady. The first gavel strike silenced the room. As the judge entered, Emily didn't look up. She sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, that same faint, unsettling smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't arrogance. It was detachment, as though she'd already accepted whatever came next. Every camera focused on her face, but no one noticed the quiet tremor in her fingers beneath the table. Prosecutor Wallace began with precision. "This case," she said, "is about a woman who chose to end her husband's life rather than leave him." Her words struck like knives, sharp, deliberate, rehearsed. The jurors leaned forward, their eyes flicking between the prosecutor and the quiet figure sitting to her right. When it was the defense's turn, Rick Hanley rose slowly, his tone low and measured. "You'll hear stories," he said, "but what you must understand is that not all scars are visible." He let the silence stretch before adding, "And sometimes survival looks nothing like innocence." The words hung in the air, heavier than any evidence to come. Emily didn't move, but her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something deeper. Relief. When the first recording was played, the courtroom changed. The sound of Daniel's voice, loud, furious, venomous, filled the speakers, bouncing off the walls. "You're worthless," he shouted. "You'll do as I say." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Emily sat still, her gaze fixed on the table. The audio continued, each minute unraveling the perfect image of the beloved officer. When the recording ended, silence followed. Thick, suffocating. For the first time, even Prosecutor Wallace looked shaken. Emily's attorney stood. "This," he said softly, "is what living sounds like when dying feels safer." The judge called for recess, her face pale. No one spoke as they filed out. The recordings had done what no argument could. They had given Emily's silence a voice. When Detective Luis Moreno took the stand, the tension in the room shifted. His reputation preceded him. Honest, unflinching. The defense began gently. "Detective," Hanley asked, In your professional opinion, did you find signs of prolonged abuse? Moreno hesitated, glancing toward Emily. I see, he said finally. Years of it. He spoke of the recordings, the photos, the interviews with neighbors. But when the prosecutor cross-examined, she turned the angle. Detective, she asked, did you find any evidence that Daniel Rowe was a threat that night? Moreno paused again. The silence pressed down. No, he said quietly. The truth had two faces, and both were staring at Emily. The gavel fell sharply. Recess was declared. Emily exhaled, as though she'd been holding her breath since the day she met her husband. It was during cross-examination that the cameras caught it again, the smile. As the prosecution replayed the final minutes before the gunshot, Emily looked up from the monitor and smiled faintly, not cruelly, not proudly, but as if she recognized the end of a long nightmare. Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence, unsure whether to continue. The judge's gavel struck once. Order, she commanded. But the damage was done. That single expression would replay on news loops for weeks, dissected, analyzed, condemned. What no one understood was that it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the release of someone who had carried the weight of silence too long. The moment the footage ended, Emily lowered her head, and for the first time, tears followed. The fifth day of trial began like all the others. Whispers, cameras, tension. But everything changed when Detective Morneau entered with a sealed envelope. Inside was a memory card, recovered from the Rowe home, mislabeled in evidence storage. The courtroom watched as the technician loaded the file. The screen flickered, and Daniel's face appeared, not the uniformed officer from framed photos, but a man unraveling. The footage was dated 2 days before his death. He was drinking, pacing, shouting into the camera. If she ever leaves me, I'll kill her first. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Prosecutor Wallace lowered her eyes. For Emily, it wasn't vindication. It was horror relived. She looked away from the screen, trembling for the first time since her arrest. The line between victim and killer had blurred completely. When the video ended, Emily covered her face with both hands. The courtroom, once hostile, sat in stunned quiet. Rick Hanley stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Rowe, why did you stay?" Emily's voice cracked. "Because he told me no one would believe me. And for 7 years, no one did." Her sobs were raw, unguarded. The sound of someone remembering every night she'd waited for the storm to pass. For the first time, even the jury's eyes softened. The prosecutor didn't object. She simply watched, as if realizing that her pursuit of justice had collided with something larger: survival's cost. The next day, another discovery emerged. An audio file on Daniel's police-issued body cam, never logged officially. It began with muffled breathing and the sound of an argument. Daniel berating Emily over a misplaced document. But then his voice lowered, deliberate and cruel. "You think I won't do it? You think anyone cares what happens to you?" Then a pause, the faint sound of a sob. Then static. Detective Moreno took the stand once more. "We believe this was recorded hours before the incident," he said. The courtroom froze again, the echo of those words heavy with implication. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was prophecy. Outside, the narrative shifted overnight. News anchors who had once condemned Emily now spoke her name with sympathy. Was it self-defense, they asked, or something more tragic? Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, half holding signs that read "Justice for Emily," the other half calling her a murderer. The world had divided itself neatly, as if morality could be split down the middle like courtroom aisles. Inside, Emily remained silent. The smile that had once made headlines was gone. Her eyes, weary and hollow, stared forward, waiting not for forgiveness, but for finality. When court resumed, Judge Marlene Carter addressed both sides quietly. "This is not a story of villains and victims," she said. "It's a story of what fear does when it's given too much time to grow." The jury listened in silence, the gravity of her words sinking in. Emily's attorney rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. In that moment, she realized something profound. Whatever the verdict, the truth had finally been spoken aloud. The world now knew what she had endured. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. Not free, but unburdened. And in that stillness, for the first time, she did not smile. The courthouse awoke to rain. Thick drops struck the stone steps, blurring the reflection of the flagpole that hung at half-mast for reasons no one remembered. Emily Rowe arrived in silence, escorted by officers who spoke in soft tones. The air inside the courtroom carried a different weight now. Less hostility, more exhaustion. Reporters still waited outside, but their voices had softened too. The jury had deliberated through the night, and the world waited for their decision. Detective Moreno sat in the back row, hat in hand, his eyes heavy with empathy. He wasn't sure anymore whether justice meant punishment or mercy. Judge Carter took her seat, tapping the gavel once. "Let us begin," she said. The words fell like a benediction over the weary faces below her bench. When the jury filed in, every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of chairs, the faint click of a pen, the shallow breaths of those waiting. 12 men and women carried the weight of a nation's judgment in their silence. Emily sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. The forewoman rose. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The pause stretched until even the raindrops seemed to stop falling. "Guilty of voluntary manslaughter." A low murmur swept the room. Not murder. Not innocence. Something in between. A verdict that balanced on the fragile edge of mercy. Emily's eyes closed. Her attorney exhaled, half relief, half sorrow. The gavel struck once, echoing like a heartbeat. When the murmurs subsided, Judge Marlene Carter removed her glasses and looked directly at Emily. "Mrs. Rowe," she began, her voice neither harsh nor forgiving. "There are wounds the law can see, and those it cannot." She paused, searching Emily's face. "This court does not excuse what you've done, but neither can it ignore the years that led you here." Every eye in the room turned to the judge, not out of curiosity, but reverence. "You will serve your sentence," she continued softly. "But I hope you find beyond these walls something closer to peace than fear." Her words silenced even the clicking of reporters' pens. For a brief moment, the courtroom felt less like a chamber of justice and more like a sanctuary of truth. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of damp earth and endings. Reporters called out questions, their voices swallowed by the emptiness that followed the verdict. Inside the transport van, Emily sat by the window, watching the courthouse fade into the distance. No cameras could see her now. Her reflection stared back, the same eyes, but not the same woman. In the seat behind her, Detective Moreno rode in silence, his presence a quiet act of decency. When their eyes met briefly in the mirror, he gave a single respectful nod. It was not forgiveness, only understanding. Sometimes, that was more powerful. That night, in her holding cell, Emily lay awake beneath the dim, orange glow of the corridor light. The world outside moved on, but inside, time slowed to a whisper. She traced the cracks in the ceiling, remembering each sound. Daniel's voice, the click of the clock, the final silence after the gunshot. Yet something had changed. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the dark. She closed her eyes and exhaled, the faintest hint of calm washing over her. Somewhere deep inside, she found what she had never been allowed to feel. Safety. Not freedom yet, but the beginning of it. 3 months later, the courthouse was quieter. No reporters, no crowds, only rain against the windows and the soft hum of ceiling lights. Emily Rowe stood before Judge Marlene Carter one final time. Her hair was shorter now, her face thinner. But her eyes carried the same calm that had unsettled so many months before. The air felt sacred, as though the building itself understood the gravity of this day. The judge read the sentence slowly. 10 years with the possibility of parole after 5. Emily nodded once. No outburst, no tears, just stillness. In that silence, even the guards hesitated. She looked up at the bench, waiting, knowing that justice, or whatever this was, would soon have its final word. When Judge Carter finished reading, she set her papers aside and leaned forward. "Mrs. Rowe," she said softly, "when this trial began, I saw a woman who frightened me, not because of what she did, but because of what she'd endured." Her voice filled the room, even though it barely rose above a whisper. "You are not innocent, but neither are you evil. You are a reminder that sometimes justice is less about punishment and more about truth finally being seen." The courtroom seemed to exhale as she continued. "If you ever smile again, Mrs. Rowe, let it be for the right reasons." Emily's eyes welled, but she didn't look away. The judge nodded once, then whispered, "That will be all." The gavel fell like the closing of a long, haunted chapter. After sentencing, Detective Moreno waited by the exit, his hat in his hands. As Emily was escorted past, their eyes met for the last time. "Detective," she said softly, pausing as the guards held the door. "Thank you for seeing me." He gave a small nod. "I just did my job," he replied, though his voice carried the weight of something deeper, respect. As she disappeared down the hall, the faint echo of her footsteps faded into the distance. Moreno turned back toward the empty courtroom, staring at the bench where justice had finally bent. Not broken, but bent. Toward something human. Time moved differently behind walls. By her second year inside, Emily had found a rhythm. Work, reading, silence. But she also found something unexpected. Life. The prison garden became her sanctuary. Each morning she tended the soil, coaxing small blooms from the earth with hands that once trembled from fear. The other inmates left her space. Some whispered that she was dangerous, others that she was blessed. But Emily didn't listen. She knelt in the dirt, breathing in the scent of wet soil and sunlight. Every seed she planted felt like a promise, not of freedom, but of healing. She no longer counted the days. She let them grow quietly, like her flowers. Years later, Judge Marlene Carter retired. On her final day, she received a letter postmarked from the State Correctional Facility. Inside was a single page, handwritten in neat cursive. "Dear Judge Carter," it read, "you once told me to smile for the right reasons. Today, I did. Not because I am free, but because I finally understand what peace feels like. No signature, no plea, just the truth." The judge folded the letter carefully, placed it in her desk drawer, and closed it. For a long moment, she sat in silence, the afternoon sun spilling across her face. Then, quietly, she smiled. Not as a judge, but as a woman who had just witnessed the rarest kind of justice: understanding.